The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. And with the news at this time, I'm Ron Robinson. A very good morning to you. First, the lead stories. Government is seeking to assure Guyanese that the Amaila Falls hydropower project is above board. A policeman has been arrested because he allegedly beat a mute and deaf man. Regionally, in Trinidad, 2 sisters were early this morning burnt to death when their house was firebombed during the island-wide blackout. Barbados may be laying off workers or increasing taxes. We have those and international news in a moment.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now the news in detail. Government's project leader for the Amaila Falls hydropower project, Winston Brassington, says that the $700 million electricity project is above board. He says that the hydropower plant will be built based on the highest environmental standards and rigid international contracts. Mr. Brassington says the Guyana government will be recruiting a firm to supervise the construction of the hydropower station that will sell power to Guyana Power and Light at about 7 US cents per kilowatt.
We also said that we will have independent supervision which will be internationally tendered to review the works that are being done. So we will hire, through a public tender, a world-class international project supervision firm to ensure that what is being designed and built is built to those standards. We also agreed that we will have an international O&M operator. So when it's built, we will have someone who will be competent to operate this.
Mr. Brassington says that the Guyana government will not be investing any money in the construction of the Amaila Falls hydropower project. The Canadian company Frontiera, the major partner in the joint venture with CGX Energy, has announced that it will be spending more than $100 million on the drilling of a second exploration well in the Quarantine Block. Chief Executive Officer of Frontiera, Orlando Carabrales, says the company and CGX expect to spend $110 to $130 million on exploring for oil in Guyana, mainly to drill well 1. Minister of Natural Resources Vikram Bharat welcomes moves by CGX and Frontiera to drill the second well after their first discovery, the Kawa 1 well in the Quarantine Block.
We have heard some good news from CGX in the Quarantine Block, which is important to us as a country because it takes development to another part of Guyana, which is very necessary too. So we look forward to further exploration by CGX in the Quarantine Block, as well as the Demerara and also Exxon is in the Kanji and the Kaitro Block doing exploration currently. So we hope that we can have discoveries in those blocks too.
Last year, the company had initially planned to spend $85 to $90 million on exploration at the Kawa 1 well, but had later said that cost could have gone up to between $110 to $125 million by the end of the drilling there. The Guyana Revenue Authority says it is cracking down on the trade in smuggled cigarettes and alcohol products. The authority says all importers, wholesalers and retailers of alcoholic and tobacco products must be affixed with an excise stamp in keeping with Guyana's customs law. The authority, in keeping with this regulation, has intensified its law enforcement efforts, which have led to several seizures of illegal or uncustomed brands. The authority, in its ongoing effort to tackle the trade of illicit tobacco brands has been telling importers, wholesalers, retailers and users of tobacco products that the legitimate imported brands which are so far approved under the Tax Laws and Health Act are Mall, Bristol, Dunhill, GT Smart, Darkies and Manchester. The Revenue Authority takes this opportunity to reiterate its commitment of working together with legitimate importers and the general public to ensure compliance with the various tax, trade and border laws. As such, persons or companies who may not be fully compliant are hereby urged to visit the Revenue Authority headquarters to regularize their trade affairs and become compliant, since a zero-tolerance approach is being adopted against smuggling and any form of tax evasion. Offenders may face penalties as stipulated under the laws, inclusive of prosecution. A mining pit has collapsed at Highwood Back Dam, Northwest District, killing a gold miner. He has been identified as 58-year-old pork knocker Christopher Bunbury of Pakira, Matthews Ridge, Northwest District. Preliminary investigations by the police in the region state that the southern wall of the dugout mining pit collapsed and covered the victim. He and another workmate were at the time of the incident digging gravel at the bottom of the southern wall, which collapsed. Police say his workmate, Hilton Ward, ran out of the pit and later returned with two other workmates, Paul Bunbury and Wilfred Bunbury, both of whom assisted in a search for the victim. His motionless body was found about 45 minutes after, and there were no marks of violence, as were seen by police. A Guyana police force constable has been placed under close arrest for allegedly beating a mute and deaf man. The incident occurred on February 10 at Oranjuk in Region 8. The force says its Office of Professional Responsibility is investigating a report in which the constable allegedly physically assaulted the 35-year-old resident of Kurukubari, who is reported to be physically challenged. Police say the man has visible signs of injuries and has received medical assistance from medics. And now regional news. In the midst of Wednesday's blackout in Trinidad, a house was firebombed early Thursday morning, killing two sisters. Trinidad and Tobago authorities are still trying to determine the specific cause of the blackout that also affected cellular phone service. More in this report from TTT News Online.
In the midst of Wednesday's blackout, a home in Currap was firebombed at around 12:10 a.m. Two sisters, Amanda and Alicia Charles, aged 30 and 31, died. First responders to the scene were answering a call about a structure on fire located at number 60 Watt Street in Currap. When they arrived, they saw smoke emanating from an apartment building that was ablaze. A crowd of onlookers alerted responders to three people inside the burning building. The front door of the apartment was breached, and the three occupants of the apartments were brought out unconscious. The fire services and the emergency health services were contacted, and the victims were rushed to the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. Upon arrival, Amanda succumbed at 12:58 a.m. and her sister Alicia was pronounced dead at 1:43 a.m. One man, 38-year-old Fidel Guerra, remains hospitalized.
Barbadians are bracing themselves for a layoff of public sector workers or an increase in taxes. This is part of the International Monetary Fund's IMF prescription for economic recovery of that largely tourism-dependent treasury. Already in bad shape, the Barbados economy had been further battered over the past 2 years by a significant reduction of tourists due to the COVID pandemic. Details in this report from Barbados Today.
The business community is bracing for possible public sector layoffs and or increased taxation in the new financial year. This as government pursues ambitious fiscal targets imposed by the International Monetary Fund. And the president of the Barbados Private Sector Association, Tricia Tanis, is calling on government to protect the social fabric by ensuring that the working class is shielded from the brunt of the pending adjustments. Back in December, the IMF declared that government would once again be asked to reach a 6% fiscal surplus by the 2024-2025 financial year, after relaxing its targets to provide the fiscal room to respond to the recent natural disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic.
It is reasonable to expect that there is going to be some degree of hardship. I believe that there will be a very strong sense that the social network must be protected in that. I do endorse the call that we may need to look and further those discussions with the IMF, see whether or not, there's opportunity to soften the expectation. I do agree, particularly there's going to be a negative impact on the social safety. But having that aside, I think it is not unreasonable to expect that there will be some adjustment. If there's revenue generation, then that speaks to that. If there's cost cutting, unfortunately, Labour tends to feel the brunt of cost cutting. I'm hoping, though, that cost cutting, before we go and look at anything other than, that anything that affects persons, because of course when you look at Labour, then you're touching the social safety net, which you really can ill afford to touch at this time, given where our society. So we're hoping that there's innovations and looking at public sector reform and seeing where we can tighten without affecting Labour.
That report was from Barbados Today. In Antigua, the principal of the Autos Comprehensive School, Foster Roberts, is claiming that a group of students may be involved in the latest incidents of vandalism at the school campus. He is also calling for the level of security at schools to be improved. The latest incident took place sometime between late Tuesday and early Wednesday, when the perpetrators forced their way into the principal's office by breaking through burglar bars. Speaking to Observer on the grounds of the campus yesterday, Roberts disclosed that the school had previously been broken into on Sunday before being targeted yet again. Mr. Foster said the principal's office was the target of the latest break-in. While the perpetrators did not make off with anything of great value, the incident is still disappointing. Stopping short of naming names, the principal of Autos Comprehensive School in Antigua explained that several observations made in the aftermath of Sunday's break-in point to the likelihood of some students being involved. School break-ins are certainly not a new phenomenon in Antigua, with several campuses falling victim to the crime over the years. In fact, the Education Ministry was prompted to install CCTV cameras at a handful of secondary schools based on the frequency of the incidents at one point. In the Bahamas, 4 members of the police force have been charged with manslaughter. We get the latest from Our News, Bahamas.
4 police officers were charged with manslaughter in connection with a killing that took place in Nassau Village on November 13th. 29-year-old Archibald Miller, 30-year-old Thomas Thurston Jr., 29-year-old Leo Dormius, and 29-year-old Kevin Greenslade are accused of causing the death of Danrico Carey by means of unlawful harm. The 4 officers weren't required to enter a plea to the charges, which stem from the decision to shoot and kill Carey as they responded to a matter at a business establishment in Nassau Village. They were granted $9,500 bail in the Supreme Court and must report to any police station with a bail management kiosk before 6 p.m. on Fridays.
St. Martin is cracking down on illegal labor to curb high official unemployment. Daily Herald St. Martin reports that Minister of Justice Anna E. Richardson says the recent multi-agency controls are necessary. Richardson says St. Martin is struggling to thrive because of high unemployment, poor tax compliance, among other reasons. Justice Richardson said that some officers had taken videos of the recent controls in Simpson Bay to safeguard themselves on how they are interacting with people. She said that in one of those videos, a controller tells a law enforcement officer that he appreciates that law enforcement has joined the controls because the controllers were often ignored when visiting these establishments and requesting compliance. According to the judge, letters had been sent to those establishments before entering, but the businesses showed resistance because they believed that they had political protection. She said that the government must also look at businesses that do not register at the Department of Economic Affairs, do not apply for their employees at the Ministry of Public Health, Social Development and Labour, VSA, and do not ensure that workers are legal residents on the island. And now for international news, we join the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. The Russian Defence Ministry says it will test its nuclear forces and launch ballistic and cruise missiles in an exercise on Saturday. President Putin will oversee the drills, which come amid soaring tension with the West over fears that Russia may be preparing to invade Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine and pro-Russian separatists have accused each other of renewed shelling in the Donbas region. Our Moscow correspondent, Steve Rosenberg, tries to unpick Mr. Putin's strategy.
Putin has been in power for 22 years, and that's given him plenty of time to think about the long game. So is it working? Is he winning? I think whatever his objectives are, and we still don't know what they are, he's certainly creating this chaos and confusion and keeping everyone guessing. He's given himself options because he knows America and NATO are not going to put boots on the ground to fight for Ukraine. I think he senses that in Europe there's a lack of unity on what sanctions to impose on Moscow if there is an escalation, and he knows all this pressure is already affecting Ukraine's economy. And he also knows that Western leaders have been coming to Moscow to speak to him. But I don't think we can say he's winning yet when we don't know what his aims are. And if, as we suspect, one of the aims is to bring Ukraine back into Moscow's orbit, that is not going to be easy, I think, because anti-Russian sentiment is rising there.
A court in the western Indian state of Gujarat has sentenced 38 people to death for their involvement in deadly serial bombings in 2008. 11 others were sentenced to life. And Barasan Etarajan reports.
A group called the Indian Mujahideen had admitted responsibility for the blasts in the commercial hub of Gujarat. Hospitals, buses and markets were among the targets. Those convicted were all found to be guilty of murder and criminal conspiracy. This is one of India's biggest mass death sentences. A defense lawyer said they would appeal against the verdict. The police said the bombings were in retaliation for the 2002 sectarian violence that killed nearly 1,000 people, mostly Muslims. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat state at the time.
Scientists say an abrupt drop in emissions due to COVID shutdowns played a key role in record rainfall in China in 2020. Here's Matt McGrath.
Hundreds of people died and millions more were evacuated during China's record summer of rainfall in June and July 2020. Now researchers say that the abrupt reduction in emissions of greenhouse gases and small particles called aerosols due to pandemic shutdowns was a key cause of the intense downpours. The authors say that over the past 4 decades, increasing emissions of aerosols from the burning of coal have decreased summer rainfall over eastern and central China. The sudden absence of these tiny fragments, thanks to COVID, had the opposite effect in 2020.
Matt McGrath with that report. World News from the BBC. The World Health Organization has announced 6 African countries will be given the revolutionary mRNA technology to set up their own vaccine production centres, helping the continent acquire self-reliance against the COVID pandemic. Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa and Tunisia will get the technology used in the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna jabs. Senegal said the aim was to have 60% of vaccines administered in Africa produced in Africa as well. The High Court in Sri Lanka has acquitted 2 top officials accused of failing to prevent the 2019 Easter Sunday bombings that killed more than 270 people. Judges dismissed all charges against the former Defence Secretary Hemasiri Fernandu and the former police chief Pujit Jayasundara. The 2 were indicted for failing to act on warnings from Indian intelligence. The president of the International Olympics Committee, Thomas Bach, says it was chilling and distressing to see how the Russian figure skating star Kamila Valieva was treated by her coach when she failed to win a medal.
When I afterwards saw how she was received by her closest entourage with such a, what appeared to be a tremendous coldness, it was chilling to see this, rather than giving her comfort. Rather than try to help her. You could feel this chilling atmosphere.
Valieva was confronted and questioned by her coach immediately after her final performance, in which she attempted a difficult jump and fell. She's been in the spotlight after a court ruled she could compete in Beijing following a failed drugs test. One of the most powerful weather systems for years has begun to move over Britain and Ireland, bringing storm force winds. The authorities are warning people across southern England and Wales to stay at home. The Army is on standby to support those affected by Hurricane Eunice. BBC News.
That's the news to the moment.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return to work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner, with results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
Now to end the news, a look at the lead stories once again. Government is seeking to assure Guyanese that the Amila Falls hydropower project is above board. A policeman has been arrested because he allegedly beat a mute and deaf man. Regionally in Trinidad, 2 sisters were early Thursday morning burnt to death when their house was firebombed during the island-wide blackout. And Barbados may be laying off workers or increasing taxes. And that's the end of the news. This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves. The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
For the toughest jobs, there's only one original motor oil, Valvoline, powering the world's heavy-duty engines in every corner of the world. You can trust